we envisioned the assembly as a series of gatherings that alternate between reading groups as well as conversations with practitioners. The third aspect of assembly is Anti-Fear Hangout, which is a collaboration with a New York-based artist and neurologist Sonia Blum. We invite you to host, to join all the upcoming gatherings, but also if you're interested in hosting or co-hosting the discussions around the topics that you find relevant and concerns that you want to kind of like unpack and find the space useful to further, develop ideas that you want to bring into your communities, you're very much welcome. We love Rashmi and Dena, and I'm really happy that they brought these amazing readings to us that we will, discuss in a group. Dena Al-Adeeb is an artist, scholar, and activist that we had a huge pleasure working with together with Farideh, Sakhaeifar, and Shimrit Lee, who are here during the exhibition Clear Hold Bill that was organized in Philadelphia last year. And the closing event for the exhibition was People's Tribunal, 28 exhibits that tackled the kind of rhetoric that was used during the war in Iraq. And we also think of that tribunal as a kind of also one of the initial steps for the assembly to develop. And it's really amazing how all these kind of like shared spaces of thinking and feeling are actually like taking shape through this period in this kind of like new virtual charge space. Rashmi Viswanathan is an art historian and a curator and an amazing human being and friend. Rashmi has been an integral part of HEKLER with Francis Estrada, artist and also cultural worker. So we've shared a lot of space and emotions and homes and everything. So you're all in good hands. Do you
want to take a second for people to go around and introduce now, or? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to call people out. I'm going to take care of this.
Okay. So before we start, someone is coming. Yeah. So before we go to the readings, we would like to ask you to go around and introduce yourselves and maybe say where you're coming from, because we have people like zooming in from all over the place. So it'd be nice to know. So we are, since this is a kind of weird format, we're just going to call out and we'll call out your name and then you say who you are. Okay. Shimrit, Amina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shimrit. So nice to see so many familiar faces. I feel like this is like a mini reunion. And I'm based in Brooklyn. That's where I'm calling in from today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Alex.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I'm calling in from Australia this morning. I'm in Sydney at the moment, and so the sun's not even up yet, which is quite funny and quite strange.
Wow.
Welcome, thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for getting up. I don't know if I would do it. Alia.
Hello. Hello. I'm Alia.
And I'm Mariam, and we're zooming in from Amman, Jordan.
And
it's 11:15 p.m. here.
And we're Amina's daughter.
It was good seeing you. Ava.
Hi everyone, my name is Ava. So glad to be here. Hi June. So good to see you. And thank you for including me in this. And also excited to learn more about everybody else. I'm in Detroit.
Great. Bojana.
Did you say my name?
Yes.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Bojana. I am calling from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So, and it is 4 o'clock here.
Wow.
Okay, Cori.
Hey, I'm Cori. I'm calling from Brooklyn. Nice to see you all. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Cori.
Caterina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caterina. I am in Athens, Greece.
Okay, thanks. Deborah.
I am Deborah. I don't know, there's feedback. Sorry. I'm calling in from Michigan, and it's also 4 p.m. here, 4:15.
Right on.
Nice to meet all of you.
Nice meeting you too. Okay. So, Eryka.
Hey, I'm Eryka Dellenbach. I'm based in Brooklyn, but I'm currently in Pennsylvania, so I'm still in the same time zone, the Eastern time zone. Good to meet all of you.
Amina.
Salam, everyone.
Salam, June.
Amina, Mariam, and Alia's mom.
Where are you based?
I'm
Are
in
you
New
in Jordan?
Jersey. I'm in New Jersey right now. So,
You're not in Jordan? What are you doing?
no, I wish I would. Eid Mubarak to everyone.
Eid Mubarak. Aziza.
Eva Davidova.
I think she just said that.
Give me some time to unmute. Hi, how are you? I'm calling from Brooklyn as well. Good to meet you, everybody.
Farideh.
Hi, so good to see friends here. I'm also based in Brooklyn and have Sadra in the background. This is hard.
Join us, Sadra, join us.
Not like this.
He's also cooking in the background, so.
Nice. Okay, Kazem.
Hi everyone, I'm Kazem. So glad to be here. I'm calling from Brooklyn.
Nice. Jelena.
Hi. I was based in Brooklyn and now in transit in Connecticut, waiting for my flight to Serbia that will open up soon.
Nice.
Thanks. Christian.
Hi, I'm Christian. I'm normally in the UK, but fled to Hungary, where I'm from, to Szeged, and it's 10 in the evening here now. I'm really nice to meet you, everyone.
Thank you, Christian. Lana.
Hi. Sorry, hi everyone. I'm calling from Tunisia. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you.
What's the time, Nana Naka? Is it 3 in the morning?
Around no, it's 9:18. Yeah, it's 9:20 p.m.
Oh, okay, still early. Okay, you're fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mandana.
Hi, I'm very glad to be here with everyone. I'm calling from Vancouver, Canada, and just like Sadra, I'm cooking, and kind of like half of my mind is like thinking about this delicious rice that I'm kind of making.
What are you making?
Tachin.
Oh, not fair.
Nada.
Hi everyone, it's nice to see familiar faces again. I'm currently calling from Brooklyn as well.
Nehama.
Hi everyone, I'm Nechama. I'm calling from Brooklyn.
Welcome.
This is Dena, I think. Okay. Read.
Right.
Rate.
Rad.
Rad.
Hi everyone. Yeah, it's Raed. I'm very glad to be here. I'm Lebanese, but I'm calling from San Francisco, and it's 1:20 p.m. here.
And Alf Mabouk, should we announce?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I just moved from being PhD student to PhD candidate. So
He's an incredible filmmaker. You all should check out his work. 74, صح? 74 is the last one I saw, but he's got under his belt a series of incredible films. Check it out.
Thank you.
Sahar.
Yes. Hi everyone. This is Sahar. I'm calling from the East Bay Area. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too. Shole.
Hi, my name is Shola. I'm calling from Oakland, California, East Bay, not too far from Sahar. Yeah. Hi, Dena. Hi, Sahar. Hi, Rod. Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I think did we skip anyone? Noor.
Heather, do you want to say something? Do you want to introduce yourself, even though I know you're?
Noor. There is one person. Okay.
No, isn't me. No. Maybe another no.
I'm Noor Balut. I'm based.
What's up? Good to see you. Sorry.
No.
421 and
Right on.
And me.
On.
I'm on. I'm in Brooklyn. It's Brooklyn time, I guess, 4 o'clock. And I'm from Haiti.
Right on.
Awesome.
I think.
Yeah,
these
these
things
things are.
people, if people keep coming in, but maybe we should get started. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
Thank you.
And now Dena and Rashmi can take over.
I think we're handing it off to Rashmi.
Rashmi.
Okay, so this is me then. Thank you guys for the lovely intro. Dena, I guess I'm taking the mantle at this point. Okay. Lovely seeing so many of your faces. Makes me damned happy because New York is going to be shut down for I don't know how long. Quick confession, I put a little whiskey in my coffee because this is
That's the way to do it.
Anyways, thank you for
one more person coming in.
But and Gabino will be here in a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to wait for an introduction for the person?
That's what I was thinking. Just
okay, sure.
And also, just send me a message that this meeting will end in 5 minutes.
That's what it was saying like 10 minutes ago. There was like a countdown, but then it went away.
Oh, okay. If we disappear soon, just
Sorry, it's Bojana. It sent me a message that you've upgraded the meeting.
Yeah, I got that message.
Or
too.
someone has upgraded the meeting.
Yeah, for the first couple sessions, it was limited to 40 minutes, but every time it said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You can go however you want." But this time it really threatened, and it said, "No, we're going to end it." So we paid them. We should have no problems. So.
Gabino, can you hi?
Hey,
introduce yourself real quick and just say where you're coming from.
Yes. Sorry, I'm a little late. I was.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get the camera on. All right. There you go. Can you see me?
Nope.
Not yet.
All right. Well, I'm gonna talk. How do I? What was the question again?
Just your name and where you're
Oh, so my name is Gabino Castelan. I live in East Harlem, Spanish Harlem, New York City. I'm an artist. Make paintings.
Thanks, Gabino. We're gonna give it back to Rashmi.
Yeah.
Heather, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
There you go.
Hi.
Oh, here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather. I'm calling in from San Francisco Bay Area, South Bay, a friend of Dena's. And
sheltering in place with a toddler, so I'll be kind of with the camera off.
Nice. There's also another postdoc. She's in the same postdoc program as I at UC Davis in Asian American Studies.
Nice.
Okay.
All right, Rashmi.
Shall I go for it? Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, great. Okay, so I asked all of you to read a couple of excerpts from larger articles. They are, in my mind, quite related to each other. One is it's by this scholar named Sudipto Kaviraj. He's based here in New York, actually, I think. And Kaviraj, that's the revisionist modernisms essay that I asked you all to read, or just a few pages of it. And that one, I think it's fairly self-explanatory what his project is. He's kind of looking at how do we make sense of the present moment in terms of our distinct histories, and more importantly, how do we theorize or like present our sense of the present moment or who we are in the present moment in terms of our distinct histories, which a thing that I will explain further in a minute. The other article is by Manu Goswami, also here in New York, a historian at NYU. And she is looking at how do we think about the future in terms of our different presents. Just a little bit of a preface to my selection of those two things. I started out so I did my PhD at NYU, and I started out as a classical Indo-Persianist. I was studying 16th and 17th century Indo-Persian manuscript painting, specifically in the Mughal court. And I sort of transitioned from that to 19th, 20th, and now I'm pretty solidly in 20th and 21st century, what's considered now the modern era for academics. And what's been really interesting about that project is the real flip in language that happens when you deal with what's termed pre-modern versus modern, and how localized it is based on which regions you're looking at. Just to give you sort of an example of certain things I'm talking about right now. So in terms of Kaviraj's article, which is looking at the definition of like modernity, I remember this one time, maybe about 7-8 years ago, I'd written my first paper as a PhD student, and I presented it to my professor, a really smart guy who had smart things to say. And it was something to do with, I had some sentence about the European influence on the Mughal like artistry in the 17th century, 16th century. Jesuit priests had arrived in Mughal court by 1510 and blah, blah, blah. And there's like European stuff comes into Indian arts during this period. And what he said when his critique of my sentence that European art had influenced Mughal art, I have never forgotten. It's really marked my trajectory since. What he said is, Rashmi, you will never, ever use the I word, influence, because it implies a passive reception of information from those who have an irrepressible dominance. I will never, ever forget those terms. Because now that I've turned into a modern...
Rashmi, can you repeat it? Can you repeat it? Like, repeat it one more time. That's very critical. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I can remember it. He said something to the effect of influence implies a passive reception of information. And it also obviously implies a power differential. You have a set of people with irrepressible power and those who are unable to stop that power. So it's like a downward flow of information. It also, furthermore, it denies the agency of those who are receiving the information. And while that might seem a little bit abstract in terms of like 17th century or 16th century art, it really hit me over the head when I started getting into modern and contemporary art. Because by the time you hit like the 1950s, 1960s, I mean, when you're talking about Picasso in like 1920, 1930, he's regularly riffing off of African and Iberian masks and whatnot. He's never ever referred to as an artist who's influenced by North African masks or whichever cultures he's sort of riffing off of. Instead, the language that colors the way that he's written, or the descriptions used to sort of around the myth of the hero of Picasso, typically ascribe to him this sort of supernatural agency. Picasso picked and chose these things from these different cultures, aka he had the intelligence, wisdom, consciousness, and agency to be able to take from different cultures and make it his own. However, when you flip it to the other context, the context that I study, what's the modern arts from Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, influence ridiculously colors everything. You read about Satish Gujral or Maqbul Fida Hussain in like 1950s, 1960s. He's referred to as the Picasso of India. And he was influenced by the fractured landscapes, this, that, and whatever else. So even though there's still a filtering of this really, I think, damaging language of genius that's ascribed to modern artists, they are still placed under this rubric of pre-modernity because they couldn't help but be influenced by European agents. It's nuts how much that colors different locals, different readings of localities of arts. So that has been like very much at sort of at my forefront, and as a historian, I like try to sort of push against so much damaging language that exists in our description of the arts from places that are considered not the Western center. So toward that end, so with Kaviraj, as I said before, he's talking about the relationship of the past to the present, how do we describe our different modernities, and he revisits the way that certain different scholars talk about it, and he refers to it as a revisionist modernity. He gives sort of a laundry list of the methods that people use. I don't feel the need to go into that right now. Rather, I kind of want to give just one more small anecdote, and I hope it sort of sheds light on the Goswami article and the connections here. The other sort of small anecdote is when I was an undergrad, I didn't really have the language to understand or fight back certain things that I thought were damaging in my education. But now looking back on it, these are things I'm trying to address. And one of them was I took this wonderful class on humanities, international humanities, and they were trying to sort of like succinctly summarize all creation ever, already a remarkably problematic project. But I remember in one of our lectures, my professor, so she gave this structuralist reading of religion and culture, in which she argues that when people were sort of subject to the forces of nature and had very little control over the land, they worshipped multiple deities. When they started having some control over the land and mastered agriculture and looked to the fecundity of the land, they started worshipping mother goddesses. And then when they had more of a control over the land and domestication of animals and more of a rationalized landscape, they turned towards a one god or monotheistic system. I mean, it's obvious that's ridiculously a problematic statement, but the fact is that sort of teleology underwrites most of the histories that I read at this point. That actually hasn't really changed. It's just people know that it's really racist to say that out loud, but it actually just sits under so much of what I read. And I remember thinking there, as someone who was raised Hindu, who has like a billion gods, I'm like, okay, you just told me I'm pre-modern. Thanks for that, you know? Like, how do I make sense of this particular reading of history? So toward that end, the issues that I'm parsing out in Goswami as well as Kaviraj there's four central issues that interest me as an art historian. So first of all, issues of translation. The cultural and political labels that are used to make these sort of comparative frameworks within which, for example, since this is what I do, Indian arts versus English arts. So typically when people are constructing these histories of India, they have to use frameworks like, okay, they started in a feudal system and then they went into this early capitalist system, so on and so forth. However, these terms are deeply, deeply inapplicable to the Indian system. Feudalism is a patently Western European political formation. And trying to force fit it onto India actually, like it denies the historicity of political projects that are taking place in India. So what I see at the heart of Kaviraj and Goswami's thing is they're looking at issues of translation. The lack of universal applicability of these things. Force-fitting Indian ways of being into Euro-defined English labels damagingly privileges English frames and understandings of the world. In the end of it, when you're giving an Indian history, Indian political history of the Mughal Empire, it just sounds like you're like cramming people into what is essentially an English framework, within which you have that same sort of progression of time. Furthermore, within that damaging history that I was taught as an undergrad in that humanities class, you have a linear goal-oriented arc. This presupposes that all time moves towards an end, like a propulsive movement of time. All right, and that's something I have a huge problem with, which I'll elaborate in a minute. And third is a model of progress which is very foundational for understandings of like modernity. Modernity sits at the end of time. It's who we are, and it defines the fact that we've achieved something, right? So in this model of progress, there's the assumption that history is a progression or a linear movement towards a better state. Within this model, implicitly secular Christianity functions as a realization of modernity. And I don't care what culture you're looking at, typically in the histories that I'm reading about the modern world, there is this sort of implicit standardization of secular Christian model as the place that we're all arriving to. And this is, of course, granted, this is a dated sort of reference, but Marx very famously talks about, Karl Marx very famously talks about the steps that humans will take, right? If everyone's taking these Western European steps, does that mean that those who haven't taken those steps are living in a pre-modern state? And that is, of course, something to wonder about. Finally, and most damaging, the utter neglect of the history and particularities of any place that is not sections of Western Europe that takes place within these models. The result is, within this sort of linear progression and this idea of a linear arc, the result is that a certain few are allotted the precious position of being modern, or equally damagingly, modernity cannot be had by all, or it can eventually be had by all, but at a time lag. That's when you have that, the pre-modern model, the developing world model. Oh, they're going to catch up. They're going to catch up eventually. And in this model, something that academically we often refer to as center and periphery model, it's basically a Euro inheritance that moves outward slowly, and those who are farthest away from Western Europe get it the slowest. So they're the ones who are like still waiting for that modern moment to happen. And I don't really need to explain why that is a really bad thing. Let's see, what are, Natasha, do you have the questions that I sent you? I totally can't find them right now.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, there's
no,
a shimmy.
up. All the way up. Yeah, I'm gonna share them also in the chat. How do our different pasts affect our sense of possibility in the present and future? Can we reconcile our many different pasts to imagine new types of collective futures?
Perfect, thank you. You can imagine how those two questions sort of apply to these particular readings. I'm going to skip over Kaviraj now because I sort of gave the broad framework for his article. I'm going to head over to Goswami. With Goswami, I think that's a really tough article to read, but I think it's really, really worth it. She looks at like sort of this moment of like profound optimism, fear, hope, and a bunch of other stuff that's happening in the 1920s and 1930s. And she refers to it as colonial internationalisms. And it's like this moment when a bunch of people across national lines are sort of envisioning different ways of being collective, different ways of empowering each other through solidarity, and ways that transgress sort of national borders. And, you know, this is a really sort of a difficult thing to talk about because, I mean, eventually some of the isms that she talks about, the Afro-Asian solidarity movements and certain Asian solidarity movements, they sort of fall by the wayside to a certain extent, but I don't want to neglect it, and I don't want to neglect it for a particular reason. What I think about often as a historian is, though so many of us in our field, in my field, are invested in looking at the ways, at the things that came before and the way that we construct meanings out of things that came before, so often we don't actually apply it to our lives and our understanding of the world around us. Like, what does it mean to actually apply this learning? Like, for example, like when I think, and this is a really over-reductive analogy, but it works for me. So I'm gonna like, something like my curriculum vitae, my CV, my calling card as an academic, right? It has a list of all the things that I've done. This fellowship that I got, or that professorship, or this, whatever else, right? It's a list of my successes, right? It's funny for me to think about it because when I was 26, I had dropped out of music school. I had moved to New York because I was absolutely sure that I was going to make it as a rock star, as a drummer. I had dropped out of music school, and I was nervous, insecure, and full of hope about what could happen. In other words, I hadn't the foggiest that I was going to become an art historian. And something like my CV, and honestly, most histories are written like a CV, are remarkably historically inaccurate because they flatten out the complexity of your engagement with that present moment. I was looking ahead and I saw 50 different paths Looking back, I can find one path and it's defined by what I've done, but looking forward, I hadn't the foggiest what was going to happen. So by having a flat CV framework or list of successes, we actually deny the historicity and the validity. And more importantly, it denies the fact that we live with those same hopes and fears right now. It normalizes the present condition, which is something I fear is particularly in this COVID-y moment. If we want to imagine structural change, we cannot normalize this moment. We must understand that we have the capacity for change. So towards that end, I think Manu Goswami really speaks to me. I think she's a beautiful writer and tough. I mean, you have to really sleep well and have lots of coffee. But broad strokes, notes with Goswami, she's basically arguing that assuming that the nation state is natural or normal or the way things have to be negates the historical context within which nation states formed. The nation as an idea is not handed down by God. It's never been handed down by God. As people made it, people can change it. More than anything, it's a revolutionary statement. We can change it. The moment Goswami looks at, in this article was when the certainty of the nation as the defining political collectivity was not so certain in the 1920s and 30s. It's a relatively new model, so people are imagining all kinds of possibilities of collective experience. As importantly, it is the model of political being that's being defined as modern. The one colonized peoples are often adopting to make a claim for a modern right to rule. In other words, the idea of even pushing for nationalism, like again, in the Indian context, there are a bunch of people who are fighting for the arrival of a nation state to combat British colonialism, right? But it may not have been, it may not have been a defining stance for them. It may have been an oppositional stance for them. The nation may not be desirable for all colonized peoples fighting for a free nation, but it may be politically expedient. Because if the nation state is defined as the modern state, then if I'm going to say I have a right to self-determine, if I have the capacity for self-determination, I'm a truly modern person, then I guess I have to say that I'm fighting for a nation state. So this European, Western European model of the nation state becomes the norm of what modern constitutes. So you kind of have to take on that form. So, and that's something that Goswami looks at, the fact that nationalism actually takes on different forms in different countries. While it's a four-letter word here, it was actually a remarkably useful tool for people to take an oppositional framework to the damaging idea that the nation was in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s and the 1950s as colonialism was perpetuated. Finally, I'm sorry, this is rather long. I didn't realize I was going to speak this much, but I guess I have a lot to say. Finally, what's important to Goswami's project is not simply looking at the hopes and fears, but understanding why people don't look at those hopes and fears now. Like they sort of pretend that it doesn't matter. So she looks at the reason that colonial internationalisms have been dismissed, even though they've been ridiculously important. And actually, for me as an art historian, right now, I look at colonial, post-colonial internationalist solidarity movements, the non-aligned movement from the basically 1960s and 1970s around India, Pakistan, Iran, and other countries, and looking how they sort of make art coalitions happen. So if history is a totality, if our way of being right now, if we have reached the apex, the modern apex, we look back at time as all of time. History is a totality. And you have to look at everything that came before us, our modern moment, as sort of this logical progression that explains the contemporary moment. Everything that doesn't fit into that logical progression then gets excised, gets dismissed, it gets silenced. Anything that doesn't explain the modern rationale of the nation state gets dismissed within most contemporary histories at this point. And that's why she argues it's a radical departure from that silence, because by addressing that silence and arguing that there were actually ways to imagine a world that wasn't defined by a modern nation state, we have the capacity to change our present condition. That is a lot. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rashmi. That was incredible. If I may just say something about the reading that's just struck me, and we'll have later, after I present, a time to discuss it as a collective, but just wanted to say something that also ties really well with my work. If you go to page, and if you don't have to go to the page if you don't want to, it's not necessary because I'm going to read it, but on page 1464, early on, and Lana, if you're listening, this is this is for you as well. So I'm just going to read the sentence that really kind of struck me for this reading, and it has made me stop and think over and over, and is very kind of in line with what I do every day and think, and kind of a good introduction to the piece I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so yet historians have tended to cleave to what Koslik, I don't know how to pronounce his name, calls the space of experience, the lived memory of past events and movements, rather than their animating horizon of expectation, right? The privileging of experience over expectation glosses over changes in conceptions of the historically possible. It affects the shifting balance of the future encoded in socio-political movement concepts such as internationalism and socialism, that even when not literally temporal, such as concept of progress, index shifting horizons of collective aspiration. I'll stop there. And it ends with colonial internationalisms underlying the improvisational constitution of imaginary futures. I love that, right? Of the way perceived geopolitical openings foster collective speculations on substantively other futures, right? Do you want to say something, or should I just go into my piece? Do you want to say something real quick about that, or because I just thought it was a great kind of.
Oh no, I completely agree. I have like that highlighted and marked up as well. But I would love to hear your voice. I feel like I talked a lot there.
No, I mean, okay, we can talk about it. I just love that as a kind of a segue into where I'm going, because that really hit me, and she's like an incredible writer, and Lana, you're writing your dissertation, you finished writing your dissertation exactly on that, so I'd love to hear more about that and from you too. Anyway, so that's just a little segue into what I want to talk about. So I guess let's go back into kind of general kind of lived experience as an entry point to this conversation. And also kind of for me, the initial spark that I guess brought us all together. So one, I'll start with the spark. So Eryka, who's on this conversation, posted, I think on Instagram, a question about, what do people think about equating COVID-19 to war, places of geographies that are undergoing war and violence, right? And that she was grappling with that and was really frustrated that people were equating COVID-19 to spaces where people are living through horrific violence, right? And I think that same day or the next day, Arundhati Roy wrote an incredible piece that if you have not read, I highly recommend you reading. I'm sure most of you have read it. An incredible piece that really addresses a lot of the things we were talking about. And, Arundhati Roy, I mean, she's just an incredible writer, but it, discusses this specific point in a very beautiful way. And then from there, Natasha got on and we started having these conversations. And I think eventually Natasha was like, well, Dena, do you want to join, do you want to participate in this assembly? So I feel like that for me was kind of the trajectory of how I came to this moment in this conversation, is this question, right? This basic question, our people like us who struggle with the present moment as being an apocalyptic moment, right? Or that this moment is about the horrific experiences of war that one lives, right? So I'm just going to use that as a framework to talk about also my own lived experience in relation to this question. So I'm from Iraq. I was born and raised in Iraq until 1980, until the Iraq-Iran war, and then moved to Kuwait as a result, and then left during the first Gulf War, the 1991, the United States first Gulf War, and then the subsequent 13-year sanctions on Iraq and continuous bombing for 13 years. And then finally, the invasion of 2003 and occupation. That's where, by that time, I was here in the United States, and then I was an anti-war organizer. So for me, these questions are not just kind of philosophical or abstract or intellectual, but rather are very much part of my physical makeup, like neurological makeup, right? And people who've gone through war can understand what I mean by a neurological makeup, that your actually neurological makeup is changed right? It's not just an intellectual process, not just an emotional process, but actually physiologically and neurologically and your physical body, the way it embodies these experiences changes, right? And is or impacted in positive or negative ways, right? So I just want to kind of talk about these general issues of like the question that brought me to this conversation, which is war and COVID, this being an apocalyptic moment, and this being kind of the end of the world, and then my own lived experience. And then also two questions. One is because of COVID and this moment of, I guess, unknowing, right? On a different level in my career as an academic, right? I just finished my PhD a couple of years ago. I'm finishing a postdoc, and I'm on the academic market. And it's extremely, you know, almost impossible at this point to imagine having a position in the next year or two. So it made me also kind of sit with myself during this COVID period and think about how do I want to reimagine myself, you know? I never really imagined myself in the academy anyways, and kind of made me sit with myself and think about, you know, the different parts of me as an artist, me as an organizer, and really brought me back to poetry and art again, right? And therefore, hence, you know, the treason, this text, the Arab apocalypse felt very, very fitting, right? It just made sense. And I kept on reading it and rereading it during this time period, and thought it would be a perfect kind of text art piece that we can discuss. So in case no one has read this, I'm going to read just one poem and then get into the discussion. Just out of curiosity, how many people actually read any of the poetry? Not necessarily expecting the whole book, but any of the poetry. Just keep your hand up so I can look through everybody just to get, okay. Oh, wow, okay, cool. So maybe I'll ask someone instead of me to maybe read this one. So maybe I'll ask some of the Lebanese folks on here. Raad or Lana, who else is Lebanese here? I don't know who else, but those are the two that come to mind. Lana or Raad, do you guys want to read page 11, the night of the non-event? And if you don't, I can read it. It's okay. But don't feel pressure.
أنا skip.
أنت skip رعد؟ يلا يا رعد. One of you. لا أنا رعد. الله يخليكم.
I'm trying to open it because you sent us the whole document. So it's page 11.
Page 11.
Page 11. I have, page 11 starts with the night of the non-event. Okay, I can read it.
Thank you.
But I'm reading it for the first time because I read other poems, but I'll give it a shot. The night of the non-event, war in the vacant sky, the phantom's absence, funerals, coffin not covered with roses, unarmed population, long, the yellow sun's procession from the mosque to the vacant place, mute taxis, plainclothed army, silence hears, silenced music, Palestinians with no Palestine. The night of the great Inca did not happen. Engineless plains, extinguished sun, fishermen with no fleet fish, with no sea fleet, with no fish sea, without fishermen, guns with faded flowers, Che Guevara reduced to ashes, no shade. The wind neither rose nor subsided. The Jews are absent, flat tires. The little lights are not lit. No child has died, no rain. I did not say that spring was breathing. The dead did not return. The mosque has launched its unheeded prayer, lost in the waves. The street lost its stones, brilliant asphalt, useless roads, dead army. Snuffed in the street to shut off the gas, refugees with no refuge, no candle. The procession hasn't been scared. Time went by. Silent phantom.
Thank you, Rad. And I think it's perfect, not just because you're Lebanese, but your work is engaging with this specific time period, right? Which, let me just quickly contextualize it if you're not, familiar with the work. Atal Adnan is Lebanese. She was born in Lebanon. She witnessed and lived through the Lebanese Civil War of 1974-1975 and ongoing, obviously. The Lebanese Civil War, I guess I should say a few things about it, was, not necessarily a civil war. I don't think of it as a civil war, just like the Iraq invasion that caused the civil war, quote unquote, and the production of ISIS is not about a civil war. It's really, about geopolitical, imperial, and regional power politics, right? How the United States and Russia and the different countries that have stakes in participating in these different wars, right? So, but in the context of Lebanon, really, it was about Israel's creation and invasion of Lebanon, and of course the United States support of that, and it ended up being performed on Lebanese soil. And she specifically, in one of her poems, talks about not only the Lebanese civil war, but really about Palestine and Palestinians, and Palestine as being and Palestinians being displaced in Lebanon, and looking at a couple of massacres. One is the massacre of Quarantina, and the other one is Sabra Shatila, and there's a third one, which I know, but I'm not, someone can remind me maybe. Tel Zatar, of course, and there's many, but these are the ones, these are Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. So after the, Palestinians were forced displaced out of Israel, violently displaced out of Palestine by the creation of Israel, relocated into Lebanon and basically lived in refugee camps. And at these moments that she's speaking about, these massacres happened in these refugee camps, right? That were organized and facilitated by the Israeli army, with support locally by the Phalange, a Lebanese right-wing movement. Anyways, I don't want to talk about the history. I needed to say this because I think it's important to understand the moment in time that she's referring to, that is critical to the makeup of not only the poetry, but the aesthetics of the poetry. And I'll come back to that in a second. I want to read one more poem and then get back to the context of the work. This one, I want to use one of her other pieces that have all these symbols, right, that are very influenced. I don't know if you can, let me see myself so I can tell you if you can see me or not. Where am I? Okay, here. So here we go. If you have not seen it, because I'm not assuming everyone has read it, all these symbols and signs throughout the book. And I'll talk about, what I think about them in a second, but I want to read one of them with you and then talk about it. Okay, so maybe page 9 was, I had 3 highlighted, but sorry, I kept on going back and forth. I never finally made the last decision because I was like, I don't want to choose. They're so good. Yeah, maybe 9, 10. Shall I read it, or does someone want to give it a chance? Lana? No? Okay. Anyone? Or should I just go for it? Or Rad, if you want to read this, haram. Anyone? No, I don't see anyone's hand. Oh, okay, fine. I'll do it.
No, Gabino, I want to do it.
Oh, please, Yalla, please. Do you have it in front of you?
You have to unmute.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. Just page 9,
please.
right?
So it's page 9 and 10. It continues on to 10.
Okay, I see. I'm gonna read. Okay, you got it.
If you want to stop at 20 point and pass it on, I'm happy to do that. Go ahead.
Sure,
please.
of course. A yellow sun, a sun, toward the sea, the sun, reckless, and in love with the sea. I'm sorry, I just have it backwards. A meritorious, lighting rod going to the heart of a lemon, a purple sun over a planetary volcano, old Mexico, bed undone over a flower, a moon non-solar, a woman non-Egyptian, a royal and solar council of kings. Great Inca ant-like sun, and blue ant in front of the red cat. Giant hopping on a dinosaur, blue-green sun, bitter misfortune. War vessel, yellow sun, peace, vessel, yellow sun, motion, boredoms, trajectory on the mobile wall, oat white hospital. Moon as green as frozen leaf under the avalanche of a solar star. A black sun, a still black, ink black blue silk tree. A black tree, a palm tree, black and inky like a tower, the silk of trees. A yellow sun in an egg, and the sea in tears. A child as yellow as the sun. A tattoo on the belly. A sun in the rectile extremity, an eye. The cut ear of the moon. A moon atrocious, a yellow crime flower on a bird's wing. A crime thrice solar toes, caressed by the flux, red Pacific Ocean. The sun is a Syrian king, riding a horse from Homs to Palmyra, open skies, preceding.
Actually, we'll stop there. That's good enough. Thank you so much. And again, in case you have not seen it or don't have a copy or didn't get a chance to read it, I'm just putting it up here just to see again the visual, because it's part of the poem, right? So you see all the signs and symbols, and so this is definitely part of the poetry. Okay. So, and Nora, I know you're on there. I forgot, لو سمحتي, if you want to pick one of the poems later, I've chosen a few. I can tell you which one I'm thinking, but if you want to read one, let me know at the end, okay? So, here we go. So I'm referring to the other two documents I sent as links that were, I guess, reviews or commentary on the pieces. You don't have to look at them. I just want to highlight a few things that I think really stood out for me there, which basically made my my prepping time so much easier, because like, oh my God, this is exactly what I was going to do. And someone actually did this for me already. So I want to actually highlight this before going into my own take. So, the first one I'll look at is this one on Atal Adnan's The Arab Apocalypse by Edith Machado. And again, you don't have to look at it if you don't want to, but if you prefer looking at it, please feel free. So she starts by saying she starts by actually choosing a quote. Doesn't the act of looking at an object becomes also one of its definitions, right? So she's referencing those images that she's using in the text, right? That this is actually part of the text, that it's not just merely, you know, an addition or a side thing, right? That it's actually part of the object. So Aditi talks about how this specific text, Atal Adnan's work, is one of witnessing, right? The nature of the work is about witnessing, and witnessing in the sense that she witnessed the Lebanese Civil War, right? But also because these are because she witnessed the Civil War and lived it, her attempt at writing about it and visually engaging with it was one about making and unmaking, right? And this is in many ways what we understand. People who've gone through war and think about war. It's about both death and living, right? And it's not, I'm not talking about it as you know, opposites, but the spectrum, right? You're constantly dealing with on a daily basis, you know, issues of death and violence, right? To such an extreme where you begin to, or at least for Atal's case, begins to look at text not just as text. How do you deconstruct text, and how do you remake text in a different way? And that was her attempt here, between merging the visual representation, the surrealism, the symbolism that what she was influenced by from, you know, 1930s French surrealism, into her text. So where she's bringing these images and text where it both makes sense and doesn't make sense at the same time, right? So she in many ways, she's deconstructing the text and remaking it in a different way. So, you know, for me, the first time I looked at this years ago, I was like, I just couldn't read it. It was really painful for me, right? It was like, how do you read this text, right? I was, you know, and at the time I wasn't looking at it. I was still doing my PhD and I was still in the academic world. So, you know, I'm looking at it in a very different light. Now I'm a bit more removed and I'm looking at things more from an artist perspective. I'm like, oh, I can go with this flow. This makes sense. Of course it makes sense. You know, how did I expect to read this as an academical best, right? So academically, when I tried to read this, I was like, this is too painful to read, like to actually go through the entire thing. Now I think day by day when I read it and reread it, it's actually really makes sense to me and uplifting because it removes these constraints of understanding reality or war or violence through these kind of linear processes of writing, right? And that's why I feel the images come into being that are both part of the writing, but the unmaking of the writing, right? So it makes sense and doesn't make sense, right? So again, to talk about, so the text is hybrid, it's a hybrid text, it's visual poetry, it's surrealism, it's about, of course, post-colonialism, and we'll talk about later with Rashmi in relationship to the other works. And of course, it's a work in translation. So initially she wrote it in French, later in English, 9 years later in English. And I believe I hear that there's an Arabic text, if someone can, you know, can tell me now. So I've heard that there's an attempt at an Arabic text currently. So, you know, it's an issue of translation too. Like I would love to read the French, even though I don't read French, but for, you know, my partner reads French and I asked him to read it for me. So actually we can talk about this in contrast in issue of translation, right? So again, so the other strands, make of act of witnessing a provocative challenge to any notion of stability that may innocently or otherwise attend to questions of representation and literature of witness. In so doing, the text becomes a disaster in the process of witnessing disaster, right? So I'm gonna read a little excerpt of the poem and then come back to it. So Beirut the yellow in its forest of guns, 12 and May and 75, Youth's moon city. The sun has its mouth stitched with a barbed wire. Stop, butcher's Arab son. A son of iron walks in a forest of guns. Then there's an image or a symbol. An eye bursts open. Stop. Ishi cried this morning. There's a symbol. Stop. I counted up to 5. Stop. The sea is on the phone. Yellow sun exterminated. Ancestors. Sun. Green. Spring. Purple sun. I can't see the rest. Okay. So I'll come back to this in a second. Keep in mind here, and I'll talk about this, like I said, later, but keep in mind here the word stop and the flow and the rhythm of the poetry, right? There's like a neurosis and a neurotic engagement. And if you read the entire book, you'll see more. There's a neurotic engagement, right? And I feel like it makes sense to me on so many different levels when one is going for war, right? There's a rhythm that changes, a faster rhythm, a slower rhythm, a deathly rhythm, a silent rhythm that she engages with so beautifully. And I'll talk about it later, like I said. So back to the witnessing, because I don't want to skip that. So this kind of poetry, this form of poetry, of witnessing poetry, bears the traces of extremity within them, and they are as such evidence of what occurred, right? Evidence of violence, but use the word evidence might suggest something like an objective, or at least unaffected observer recording that which happens outside of her, offering to us the legible document of a Holocaust. The trace of extremity is born by the poem of witness. How do its speakers, languages, and forms enact or become unaffected by the horrors to which they testify, right? Doesn't simply represent, okay, does the poem, poem is one that doesn't simply represent, but becomes, and in becoming weeps, interrogates, admits complicity, embraces, bears out on the page traces of extremity. An abstract poem of the sun. That's how she started actually writing about this. This was an abstract poem for the sun. It ended up being, then she talks about how the war broke out and then it took over, right? So it was initially an abstract poem about the sun, right? And she says, I was so inhibited by the omnious sense of disaster, of madness, that only that way could I express it. I was witnessing an explosion per se, an apocalypse per se, and I saw it in color. The abstract poem becomes overcome. And I love the way she says that, right? So again, the issue of witnessing, in which the overwhelming and overwhelmed, right? In this poem, radicalizes the genre of witnessing. Firstly, perception itself is a radical means of being in the world. Secondly, it is not clear how many witnesses there are, how stable they are, or even how human they are. And thirdly, language seems to ingest the violence it meets, and rather than record it, expels it out in a sonically and visually fraught lines of meaning and non-meaning. And I love that, right? Because that's, as an academic, you're like looking for the meaning, right? And as an artist, there's that part of me that's looking for the unmaking of meaning, right? Or the reconstructing of meaning in different ways, not just textually, right? And I think she does it so beautifully. So other things that I want to bring up. Yeah, and she ends with this, which I think is beautiful. So in other words, even as the sun illumines terrestrial human-sourced catastrophes, it itself undergoes catastrophic change. Violence and decay are not merely being witnessed, they infect the very process by which we observe and record, right? I thought that was beautiful. And then just a few comments about the other piece, the teaching at Al-Adnan, which I read and I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I go through when I teach. So she starts with talking about sitting a few days before teaching a class and collecting all these different books, you know, she's going to reference, right? So she picks, what does she pick? She picks, so it's a class, she's teaching a class about the withdrawal of the image in contemporary art and poetry, right? So she borrows from different works. She looks at Jalal Tawfiq's work, who did the introduction for Atal Adnan's poetry book. She looks at Paul Celan, she looks at Aimé Césaire, she looks at Antoine Artaud, and many others, right? So she talks about the day, 2 days before teaching or a few days before teaching, where she kind of consumes these works, right? She's trying to ingest all these pieces to think about this work in comparison or in relationship to these works, right? So she says, teaching poetry is never easy. At least it's not for me. And I agree, the same thing for me. I always come to it with a sense of wanting to master the text or to appear accountable to it. And yet with a desire simultaneously to deny this irresistible grasping. When faced with poets like Celan and Adnan, of course, any hope one might have of achieving mastery over the language of the text is completely challenged. One can only fail and produce the best possible outcome in this failure. And I love this, right? Interpretation is not enough, not explanation either. Like Talesman, the night before teaching Adnan, I surrounded myself with works by Aimé Césaire, Artaud, and others. I also read some of Amiel El-Kaz, After Arabs and Jews, Adnan, and other writing of after the Lebanese Civil War. Reading around or in relation to a text in preparation to teach, there's a sense of pressure which attends this kind of preparatory reading. I like this pressure. Teaching becomes more like an improvisation through compression. Having to find your way through a reading of a text extempore and in conversation, which is hopefully what I'm hoping to gain here, right? In this conversation. I'm gonna skip this. Let's see if I want to talk about any of this before moving forward. Yeah, I think here. Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about the neurosis a little bit because I brought that up earlier. I said I want to talk about it. So the observation of neurosis gets me thinking about beats, whom Adnan is clearly channeling in dialogue with, if only by common texts. French existentialism, other examples. I imagine Adnan's narrative speak as a kind of beat reporter, right? Allen Ginsberg of Wichita Vortex Sutra driving in a car, listening to the radio, dictating his poem into a tape recorder. I think of the mythological and romanticized speed-induced literally experiments of Kerouac on the road composed on benzodrine. But this is civil war. This is Barbary. There's nothing beat about that, right? Adnan makes reference to Wichita in her text. Is this a reference to Ginsberg poem or to the Native Americans from whom the name derives? Throughout the Arab apocalypse, Native Americans' culture, the peace-loving Hopi in particular, forms a counterpoint to the Christian Muslim Arab culture of Lebanon. The poem has the metabolism of a beat road poem. I like this about it, but there is something perverse about comparing Adnan's poem to the beats, where the beats revealed in a post-war American economy dependent on the devastation of Europe and lamented their alienation, the alienation of angry white men in the throes of late capitalism. Adnan is talking about the suffering of people in an extremely volatile moment, a moment in which she is participating, of which her work is exigent. What can be done about this? And she talks about how her students commented on the word stop and the neuroses. So the word stop appears here as it appears repeatedly throughout Adnan's work. We talk about this word. The word is telegrammatic, we decide, but it also introduces, as two students point out, a neurotic pace into the text. It is a kind of tick, stop, may also be read through a journalistic perspective. Stop the war, attend what is going on in Lebanon now. Given the title of Adnan's book, to stop also indicates a kind of apocalyptic event, where an apocalypse is what ends or happens at the end of the world. What stops the world, as the title of Jalal Tawfiq's foreword to the 2006 edition of Adnan's book has it, right? And I'll end with this. Does this reading make sense to me? I'm not sure. Did it make sense to my students? I'm doubly unsure. Meaning in teaching, how do you convey it? Faced with not just a difficult text, but an impossible one. There's something impossible about both Adnan and Cesar. What can you do except reform or presence this impossibility? I think this goes back to something Fred Moten was talking about in an earlier post. How in teaching, as well as our work as critics, scholars, and theorists, can we perform a poem's text difficulty? How might going down, evoking the hellish resources of schizophrenia or automatic process be absolutely necessary to translate, which is to say, bear across a text meaning, is to enact a text meaning, to suffer it, to become patient to it, beyond mastery. These questions seem all more urgent grappling with the text that is meant to bear witness, as both as Adnan and Cesar's work does. So I just love this piece, I thought, in this moment that we're all collectively going through. And really wanted to pick something that was about the unmeaning and the unmaking, and about the kind of the surrealism and symbolic nature of it all, right? Let's see, just time. I guess I should probably end so we can actually have a conversation. And I guess, again, part of the, just relating it again to Rashmi's piece, again, that piece that I read earlier from Rashmi's piece on page, what was it? 1464. So instead of, which I think Lana deals with, and I would love to hear Lana's take on this. So this moment in time, we're not only looking at lived memory of past events or movements, but we're looking at animating horizon of expectations, right? The privileging of experience over expectation glosses over changes in conceptions of the historically possible. right? Colonial internationalism underlined the improvisational constitution of imaginary futures, of the way perceived geopolitical openings foster collective speculation on substantively other futures. And these are the things I've been thinking about, and not only as an academic, as an artist, but I began these salons several years ago that one of them actually Rad attended, called Arab Swana Futurism, where I invite folks like us to come and perform their works, or exhibit their works. Until now, they've been installation, performance, art, video art. But in the past, they've been poetry. I've had people do theater. So anyways, I've done it in Cairo, I've done it in New York, and San Francisco, and LA, and all these different places I've lived. I've attempted to do these kind of Arab Swana Futurisms, and I had stopped when I moved to the Bay Area, and I recently, this January, kind of reinitiated this space where I invite folks like us to come and both present their work, perform their work, but also to collectively think about these issues, because I feel like this is the moment where there's an urgency to do this. And I'll stop here and open it up for collective conversation. I'll open it to you all. So if you want to say something, maybe just put your hand up. If I miss someone, please, Natasha or Rashmi, let me know.
Thank you, Dena, by the way. That was awesome.
Am I missing anyone's hand?
Yeah. Eryka,
or just start speaking.
Say something.
Yeah. This is kind of jumping to another section of the text, teaching Atel Adnan. It's a sentence that goes, does surrealism give César the permission to project images from his reality? And then it says facts as dream imagery. And then it clarifies it as imagery supposedly from his/the unconscious. I thought that was
what
a really
page is that?
interesting.
Can you tell me what page? Sorry, what page is that?
I apologize.
Don't worry. Don't
I didn't
worry.
take it down.
No, don't worry.
Oh, I can't. Yeah, I put it on my computer, but anyway, it's too long to get it.
No.
But I thought it was just a really interesting way of, I mean, it can mean so many different things. I think the idea of like pre-existing art or pre-existing forms as a means of like permission implies that there's this repressed desire to relate something or articulate something. And I started to think, sorry, I'm being a little abstract and non-specific, but I started to think about it in relation to a text from, I think it was the first HEKLER meeting. And they were talking about like dreaming as like, there's like this daydreaming and there's this night dreaming that's taking place. And what was I going to say? Just this idea of like, you're having an experience, and then how does that articulated experience become projected as dream imagery? It's almost like there's this like conscious like translation of it into the unconscious, rather than like you have the experience, it gets ingested, and then it comes out later as a dream, and then you remember it, you know? And I was just really interested in that statement.
No, it's a great one. That's a perfect one, actually. I'm glad you shared that with us. That's perfect. I'll say something about it later. I don't want to take space now. Anyone else?
Dena, Christian had just shared a question in the chat box. Christian, do you want to just share your question yourself?
It was not the question, it was just the part that Eryka highlighted, so everybody can see it. There was no question.
Thank you. But do you have any comments now when you're talking?
Not at the moment yet. Not at the moment, sorry.
Thanks.
I'm still thinking.
I think Rad also wanted to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's like very fragmentary what I'm going to say, maybe in the spirit of
But it's perfect. Come on, Adnan. That's when you can be fragmentary and sound really, really on point. If you didn't sound fragmentary, that you shouldn't be here.
Yeah, I was also thinking about this idea of witnessing, and in Machado's reading of Adnan and the focusing on witnessing. I like what Eryka is saying, because it makes me think about also the temporality of witnessing, because we expect to witness something and then record it for something that is in the future. We're going to be, telling what we have witnessed. And Machado is kind of suggesting a different idea of witnessing in Adnan's work, one about dissolution. So that made me think of a text that I just read recently by Naisarji Dave on human rights or animal rights activists in India who witnessed the death of animals. And then she links the epistemologically the idea of witnessing to one of becoming, and she interprets the concept of becoming in a Deleuzian way by saying that so witnessing as becoming is not to go from one thing to another, but it's an event, a phenomenon, an act in which both original categories are proved to be infinitely what they are not. And I felt that the kind of witnessing that we have in Atul Adnan's work is one where our like self-contained boundaries as human beings is kind of dissolved, and I kept on thinking that's so relevant nowadays as we're talking about the Anthropocene. But then, okay, the fragmentary part that's jumping to something else, but maybe also related. I kept on thinking, oh, the title of this of these poems is the Arab apocalypse. So is the Arab apocalypse different from the apocalypse, which is also a nudge to the other readings? How can we think the apocalypse also as in the way that the suggestion to read modernity in more localized forms, how is the Arab apocalypse different from the other apocalypses? And what about we all talk about the temporalities of modernity, what about the temporality of apocalypses? Have we as Arabs arrived to the apocalypse while everybody else is moving towards this? And then
that's a great one.
Being a witness now of those poems are, with a new sense of apocalypse. Are we in the same apocalypse that was the one that Atul Adnan was describing, or is it a returning, recurrent, eternal return of an apocalypse? So I don't know, a lot of thoughts that are not well framed at all.
No, blacks, it's perfect.
So that.
Could I just jump in for a second? Rod, I thought that was a really interesting comment. And I'm going to steal from Mandana, who wrote about Shahid completely. I think that's a really sort of appropriate sort of thing to stick down there, or Shahid. So Rod, if I'm to understand what you said, I'm going to try to regurgitate what you said, right? Because I thought it was really interesting. So if traditionally speaking, conventionally speaking, a poem or literature is a place where you transmit information or transmitting info on the trauma. The nature of like hyper-traumatic experience, as you put sort of that Arab apocalypse experience, or however you phrased it, the poem itself becomes the site of the trauma. And the very nature of witnessing shifts, and there's a greater immediacy to the nature of the poem itself. And as the poem travels in time, and obviously it travels through each of our hands, acquiring different meanings as it travels through our hands. And as the poet herself, Adnan, moves through time, the nature of that evidence changes. To address what you said about Deleuze, that it's perpetually a meaning that is in process.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of like on track with what you were saying? I hope I got.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. But I just wanted to add also this idea of, I think in her poem where she's the anthropocentric focus is kind of dissolved, and I feel that's very contemporary with all the talk about the Anthropocene, is that we're witnessing a lot of thinking of how can we think the future in a non-anthropocentric way. And I felt just the immediacy of that in Atal Adnan's work. Yeah.
And can you just repeat also, I love what you were talking about, just to add to that, or in relationship to that, is the temporality method of the Arab apocalypse. And can you talk about a little bit about that in relationship to what you just said?
I mean, sure. I don't know if I have this like really formulated, but
yeah.
I mean, I was raised during the Lebanese Civil War, and I just feel that we're perpetually in a state of apocalypse, and maybe because now what's happening in Lebanon is so dark and keeps on getting darker, even though it might be not as dark as what's happening in Syria, for example, or in Yemen. But what's dark about it is that there's always, I think, the feeling that you're on a, you're not in the catastrophic event yet, but you're very close to it. And I was just thinking, how can we historicize the apocalypse in our Arab situation? And I'm just taking to task this idea of how to read the title of these collections, the Arab Apocalypse. Is it already there? It's something that is unfolding, or is something that's recurring? Yeah, not really well formulated. Sorry, but
no, relax.
Christian.
I just started to wonder, and Raid, you mentioned that how to actually understand the idea of apocalypse. I think understanding the apocalypse as one single event is itself a very kind of Western perspective, this kind of like dramatic event that we all experience. And I think it's really right to point out that we always awaiting that one moment. And, you know, thinking in our current times even, or kind of any type of scenario where apocalyptic thinking appears, I think there is this ease that we have to rethink this one event because it's just a series of processes. And I think what's really interesting for me with reading Adnan, although I never experienced any kind of traumatic event in my life similar, is this kind of continuous happening of events rather than one single event taking shape. And it's not even like you're waiting for the big outcome. It's just a constant state of flux, of constantly becoming. So I think even calling it Arab apocalypse redefines the word apocalypse in a way that is a lot more destabilized the kind of Western meaning from which we all kind of became familiar with because of certain education. I don't know, just something interesting to share.
Also, Bojana, what is it?
Yeah, I was really struck by the poetry, but also by Rad's comments. And one of the things that I really sort of wanted to put forward is that whenever I speak, and I'm just to give a little bit of context, I'm from former Yugoslavia. I was born in Bosnia. So apocalypse also happened for me some 30 years ago. But, and this is where I kind of, when I came to the West for the first time in my life and started meeting people, not Western people, but people from other parts of the world that we can call from non-Western parts of the world, I've realized how many people share my story of the apocalypse. That these apocalypses, as you, Rod, so well put it, have been happening throughout centuries and decades that we've kind of all witnessed. And that's where I kind of see the political potential, if you will, that there is this sort of individual trauma that, you know, because the apocalypses have happened at different times, you know, in history for many of us, but they are also connected in similar geopolitical, economic, and social relationships, and that lends itself for a kind of unity in not in sameness, obviously, but unity of understanding, at least of sharing of this notion of apocalypse. So when I kind of, especially now with COVID, it was funny because all the Western people were like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. We have to have water and canned food and oil. And I'm like, I've been living by hoarding food for the past 30 years because I'm expecting the world to end. You know, I've been expecting it to end for a very long time. So it's not news, but it's sort of like interesting how these, Dena, you were saying earlier how, you know, this is a neurological or physiological thing, that it changes you. So, and that's where I see the potential, the political potential of international solidarity. It's with these common kind of threads that we can pick up, even though we're coming from totally different parts of the world.
I may just say something also about what Rad said, which I think that, you know, I think if I can quote you, the moving away or dissolving of the anthropocentric focus, right? Which, and I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to just bring up in the context of this specific conversation is you know, Atel or, you know, Adnan's moving away or dissolving of the anthropocentric focus, of looking at the disaster or the apocalypse not only of humans, right? This becomes like a side note, but really of not only just the earth, but the sun, right? And she talks about in many ways all over the text, you know, the sun being multiple things, it represents multiple things. I'm not going to go into what it represents, but everything from death to birth to rising and setting to beginnings and endings. She talks about it in different ways, like the whole spectrum of what sun represents. And this is what she says that I think really speaks to exactly this conversation we're having right now. The radio says history allocated 10 billion years to the sun. The sun has already lived half its age, right? So in other words, even as the sun illuminates terrestrial human-sourced catastrophes, it itself undergoes catastrophic change, right? Violence and decay are not merely being witnessed, they infect the very process by which we observe and record. So I just wanted to add that, and then if there's anyone else, please just jump in.
Sahar, yeah.
Yes. Hello. I just wanted to say, like, there was the apocalypse in the Western world before any of us. There was World War II, and before about World War I, and like, you know, the war was about to explode. So I don't think it's so much as a Western thing that they're looking up, waiting for it to happen, or for us that it's perpetual, but it's just like who remembers what. You know, our generation has lived. I'm from Iran, and I think Dena and I probably shared the same traumas of the same war on the two different sides of the border. But I think it all depends on what we have through our generation lived through that apocalypse, and it feels perpetual to us because there's no end to it. But for example, the Western world has maybe lived through it, but that generation doesn't remember it anymore. So the people who are thinking that the COVID-19 is going to bring the end of the world are the people who have not yet, or have not lived through it, or don't have the memory. But I also wanted to say something about modernity, that it's always on my mind. And I was wondering if the first speaker, I don't remember her name, sorry, I don't remember many people here, but what was your name? Rashmi, yes. And what you were saying about modernity and how, like, that idea of influence was really interesting to me. But, you know, I'm a writer, and it always comes up in conversations on when a society becomes modern, and it's something that I've always thought about. Is it when we have roads and telephones and the internet and the toilet, or is it something more than that? And I've always sort of believed, I feel that I don't believe that there's this one modernity that has happened somewhere and it's now being imposed on us. That wouldn't be right. I would like to think of modernity as in something that sort of that guarantee of human rights, for example, or modernity in civil rights and civil movements, and justice and equality and feminism, and anywhere where there's that rise for like the minorities and the marginalized. I'd like to think of a society that's modern as a society that protects its citizens. So not a society that necessarily has many roads or freeways, you know? So I was wondering, what modernity were you talking about when you were talking about that sort of, which is true, you know, colonialism brought a lot of that and imposed a lot of that upon us that were not necessarily part of that Western world that was going through industrial revolution and so on. But is it okay if we see another society has achieved certain goals of guaranteeing justice and equality for its citizens, and our society has not? Is it okay to be influenced by that, to let yourself be influenced by that, or learn from it, or just see what path they have taken and so on? Is that okay? Is that what modernity is? Is that learning from each other is? And where is it wrong, or where is it modernity becomes something that causes trauma, for instance?
Rashmi, do you want to take that, and then I can say something if there's a need?
Sure. I'd be glad to. Hi, Sarah. Nice to meet you. Let's see. But, you know, modern is a really, really, really loaded word. It actually means so many different things. And the type you brought up a couple of different types of modern, and I feel I should address that here. I think that these scholars would not at all be at odds with you, not by a long shot. What they are contending with is a conventional notion of modernity as being a bureaucratic apparatus, a complex bureaucratic apparatus within which a largely democratic regime is had. That's typically how modernity is described in like sort of like mass news, that type of cycle, right? Which is really different from what you're talking about, which I think is equally valuable, than a notion of like the end of days when certain values are hailed above other values. In your case, equity, or I don't know, equitable distribution of resources, or the people's rights. That. So I just want to make that distinction between those two things. So I absolutely agree with you. I don't think these scholars would at all be at odds with you. We're just talking about apples and oranges right now.
I'll say one quick thing, and then if anyone else wants to add, trying to see where Sahar is, I can talk to you. Where are you?
Sorry, Dena, before you...
oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
I just want to ask Paul, just first to say, Paul, welcome. We had a person joining us. Can you just briefly introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from? I just need to, sorry. I think you can. Can
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Hi, Dana. How are you?
Good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Likewise. Apologies, first of all, for joining a little late. I had a bit of a thing come up, but I thought I would still make an effort. I'm a painter right now. That's what I'm involved with, making oil paintings. I'm actually in my studio right now, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York, in the epicenter of all this mess here. And what else? It's actually opening up a little bit here. So it was intense a few weeks ago, and had to cope with a friend who was getting sick, and I had to help him out as well. So it was just a bit of a trying to focus back again on things. What else? I was maybe just a little bit about my background. born in Baghdad, immigrated when I was like 9, and I heard something about the Lebanon and the civil war there. I had some experience with that as a child as well.
You grew up in Lebanon, during that period.
Sorry?
You grew up in Lebanon during that period. You
Yeah,
witnessed
about
it.
Well, about 2.5 years we were in Beirut, and we were waiting for our immigration papers to come through, basically. And we experienced the beginning of it when it just exploded. About 6 months, and it was a very difficult time. It's actually a place that I returned to. Previously, I thought of it very much as a trauma and coming to it directly, but actually, the further I'm away from it, the more ways I'm finding to return to that indirectly. It's just sort of a side note about trauma. So, immigrated to Detroit and made my way to Brooklyn in '84, and I've been to study art, both undergraduate and graduate at Pratt and Bard College, and I've been here since then. So Brooklyn is my home, and so I hope I can catch up with everyone about what the conversation is about.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
If I may just comment on how we're doing with time. Just a comment about comment in relation to Sahar's comment, actually, or respond to Sahar's comment. I think one also point to consider, and I'm trying to make this succinct because it's a really complicated conversation to be had, but I think, how do I break this down simply without getting into all the history of it? But basically, okay, 2 things. One is I guess the achievements of the West, right? What we consider achievements, right? Which I think you're referring to, right? The growth, the supposed human rights infrastructure that gives rights to its population. We need to, one, that supposedly came out of the Industrial Revolution. Few things about that without getting too much into it. That came upon and at the expense of the subjugation of the majority of the world, right? That's colonialism, right? So England or the Netherlands or Italy or France, all these Western countries, right? They became who they are through the Industrial Revolution and gained all these freedoms and all these, like the modernity, right? Because of the colonial history, because they had labor that was free or inexpensive, because they had resources, extraction of resources from all these countries without having to pay anything. So I think the inequality is very critical to and understanding how colonialism gave quote unquote progress to the Western world, number one, right? And we can talk about that if you're interested. So I think that's really important. So that this illusion of human rights, this illusion of these societies of being democratic and having the rights of an individual, right? Which we can also deconstruct, saying how it's problematic as an individual versus looking at it as a collective, right? But these rights are only given to certain kinds of bodies, right? And this is what they call biopolitics or necropolitics, right? So certain bodies, certain Western white bodies are seen as a site for investment in human rights and given rights, versus certain bodies don't exist, right? The mass carpet bombing of Iraqis, Afghans, Yemenis, Libyans, we can go on. These are, so that's that. And then the other thing I think is critical to mention is so again, World War I and World War II, if there's an apocalypse happening in the West, it was simultaneously happening in the Third World. Because like I said, civil wars or wars in the region, not only in the Arab region, but in the Third World at large or the global South, Europe was fighting those in those countries. Yes, Europe was destroyed, but it was destroying alongside simultaneously places. Iraq was being bombed during World War I and World War II, right? And not only were they being bombed, but the weapons were being tested. The first, everything from photography to cinema to weapons were being tested in these sites, these global, these third world sites. Anyways, I can go on forever, but I wanted to just see.
No, I completely agree. I actually didn't mean to say that the industrial revolution of these countries led to the respect of human rights and so on. I don't agree with that at all. I think what I meant was all these movements that were happening in the Western world at the time, all these anti-fascist movements and freedom movements and so on, that were not necessarily in line or agreed with these sort of injustices that was being perpetuated by all those who were leading the industrial revolution. But for example, I know that the Iranian revolution in part was born out of the leftist ideology that was coming from France and Russia and so on into Iran. And they were starting to think about, what it means to be the underdog, or what it means to have a monarchy, what it means to have a republic, and all of these concepts, social concepts that were being to some extent brewed in these Western world and were coming in. So I think mine was more of an ideological growth of humanity that at least in parts have inspired also other freedom movements around the world, but definitely not the human rights they've been trying to sell us for the past century or two. So completely agree. And so I just wanted to clear that up. Yeah.
Bojana, can you actually, before you start speaking, I would want to point out that also Bojana just published a book around non-aligned modernism, focusing on former Yugoslavia. So it would be really interesting for you to address actually kind of mutability of, modernity in that context, especially looking into kind of socialist and anti-fascist heritage, but also the relationship with the regime when it comes to perpetuating certain visual culture that was socially very much grounded.
Yeah, I found Rashmi, your comments in the beginning of the meeting were really echoing my own thoughts on modernity and modernism, because I was wrestling with this idea of how to being educated in the West, you cannot not escape the kind of Western theoretical models that are being structured or given to you in academia. So I was really trying to think about how is it possible to create a historiography of modernity outside of the Western historiographical models, and to think about what you, Rashmi, were saying earlier about how do influences actually communicate, so that in fact we can read Picasso's work as being influenced by African work and not the other way around. And so that I'm really interested in this point of how do we extricate modernity from being Western only thing, and how do we think about modernity and how it happened outside of that, and how the context of colonialism, of economic exploitation have brought a different kind of thinking about modernity, and aesthetics and politics and everything, and I think that's really that's where really interest for me lies, and I was trying to grapple with that in Yugoslavia, and obviously I had to come in to a realization that yes, they were influenced. Yugoslav art and culture and politics was influenced by the West, but not completely. There's ways in which it's to try to avoid that, and I'm sure that that's sort of the case when looking at other places. And then another thing is to think about, obviously, modernity as a larger trajectory than just the 20th century, and think about 200-300 year of history and how it developed. And then to see how, to me, actually, those countries that were newly decolonized after World War II were doing an immense amount of physical, mental, intellectual effort to build all types of infrastructure. And so when we compare, artists coming from non-Western world to like large, exhibitions in the West in the 1960s and 70s, we compare them to Western artists as if this is comparable. Like when Yugoslav artists are exiting World War II, they are coming out of war. Like half of them were in concentration camps. Some of them were actually fighting, and there was no fucking infrastructure. There was no cultural infrastructure. There were like 1 or 2 big museums in Yugoslavia at the time, and everything else, there was no art schools. So how is it possible that we can compare that kind of cultural production with someone, let's say in the United States or in other parts of Europe, where they already had infrastructure? So that, to me, like coming back to material historiographical understanding of how modernity developed is extremely important. And the amount of work and effort coming from different countries, post-colonial countries, to come to grips with the Western modernity was really important as well. So.
But to respond to you, first of all, I really want to meet you. I'm more than aware of your scholarship, and we live too close to not meet each other. So anyways, that out of the way. Yeah, I agree with you. And like this notion of influence that still I think is pervasive. I think there are certain strategies that one can use to fight that particular model, but they don't really have a lot of traction because there's not a lot of language around it. Like, for example, for me, like my hobby horses, I'm really tired of stylistic genealogies being a guiding principle or framework for art histories or histories in general. Like typically you have some genius dude who is locally defined, so Spanish, aka Picasso, who comes up with this groundbreaking idea, and then through the stylistic genealogy, you trace the movement of that idea to the rest of the world, right? That model needs to go away. There are other ways of conceiving of the movement of ideas that don't have to place responsibility purely on one person's genius-ass shoulders, right? So you can have, like, for example, there are other diffusionary models, like you can have models of affiliation, like a camaraderie. There are other ways, because let's face it, stylistic genealogies, everything is a metaphor. The only way we construct history is a metaphor. We typically use like a family tree, which is a metaphor, and then all those branches, everyone else comes out, right? It's time to dream up other metaphors that don't have to be rooted in one particular circumstance, that deny the agency of all the leaves as they are, unfortunately, sort of cast at this particular point. I think there's some scholars who are doing really, really beautiful work in this way. I'm psyched to read your book because I've heard really great things, and I'm sure you're engaged in that conversation as well. And one more thing, to respond to what you said about material conditions, that's really tricky, and I'm passionate about like rediscovering the material conditions, because let's face it, what's writing a history if you don't look at the history of stuff? The details, right? What, like, were they able to make a living off of it? Were they able to, like, was there a patronage, blah, 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 blah. But, like, just to, like, give you sort of a practical example of some of the ways I'm, like, hitting my head against that right now is I was in India a couple of months ago for a research fellowship, and I was there to actually research the material conditions within which certain artists became visible to international patrons, becoming essentially the face of modernism for India. Like M.F. Hussain, anyone who knows global modernism knows M.F. Hussain. Under what conditions did he become the stand-in for all of India? Under what conditions did Parviz Tanavali become, like, freaking the definition of Iran, right? So I went to India to explore, like, the material conditions within which this happens, patronage, what kind of jobs these sets of artists had, who they associated with. And I realized that I was hitting my head against a wall because no one wanted to talk to me, because... Of
course.
Dena? Is that you? Yeah. Yeah. No one wanted... no, go ahead, please. No one wanted to talk to me, or at least the biggest heads who like theorize about the stuff in India didn't want to talk to me. And I think for actually a really good reason. Like, more often than not, people discuss the global south or east or whoever you want to call, like what's been traditionally termed the second and third world. They typically historicize and post-colonialize it, meaning they create this sort of like the link between the literature, the poetry, or the art and history is entirely political. And it denies the agency and the actual formal like efficacy of the artwork itself. The artwork becomes diffused within that broader model. Unfortunately, people from the global south or whatever phrase you want to use, they get subject to that kind of reading, right? Within which they are simply subject to material circumstances. But then typically when I read histories of arts from this country particularly, they get read in terms of genius, and their historical conditions within which they live get sort of like placed a little bit to the wayside because their genius is a little bit bigger than the country they come from. Right? So for good reason, I can understand why people like, well, at least one particular person who really shut me down was like, shut the fuck up. She did not want to hear about a person trying to historicize these people when she's trying to get it out there that they're geniuses who deserve to be seen on their own right. So that's a really, really tricky thing. Like trying to balance those two types of readings. I don't know if you've encountered that in your research, Bojana.
I haven't yet. I'm waiting for responses to my book. I might get shut down, so I don't know. But one of the things that I've been sort of thinking about was sort of the uneven playing field that art history is placed upon, so that, artists who were coming from other parts of the world were continuously said, oh, well, there was nothing coming, there was nothing interesting coming, or their art or this and this art was less developed than, because of this and that, because of aesthetic, usually because of aesthetic reasons, I feel. And I kept thinking about, well, what happens when, artists have no studio, or when they don't have enough paint to paint because there's just no paint because the conditions are such, right? So that's what kind of got me. But I agree with you that it is tricky because it kind of reorientalizes that. And I understand that, but I think that we cannot extricate it. I think that, a complex argument will be able to do both things and not take away or reorientalize people's conditions and work.
Thanks, Bojana. Shola, and then Christian. Oh, you're muted. Wait.
Okay, now I'm okay. Thank you. Hi. Yeah, I think I might sound like a giant mishmash of words, but as an artist, also myself, I think that one of the things I think about is, and I hope this doesn't sound like really elementary or something, or the way that I'm thinking about it is like, well, why does paint have to be considered, like the thing? Like, why does something need to have the same exact tools or the same exact materials to be seen and understood in that same way as art? And I think that one of the things this like brings me to, or well, not necessarily, but one of the things I'm like thinking about, and especially through the readings, but really the sort of Adnan's work, how it's so visual. One of the things that it makes me think of is, and through the other readings, is that, well, like modernity must constantly destroy and erase in order to be modernity. And that's how I'm understanding some of these things, and understanding both the sort of current situation with COVID-19 and also sort of other ways that I read the text. And so like, I don't know, when I wonder, like, in this way, within this Eurocentric model, right, of what modernity is, and, seeing this issue in a lack of translation or in a mistranslation or just non-translation, is the sort of idea, it seems to me that like apocalypse becomes the recipient of modernity, and at the same time, in a way, maybe like the sender of it, yet the Eurocentric definitions of such are not able to hold the sort of totality of what apocalypse could be. And this idea that apocalypse, in that modernity is constantly destroying and erasing itself. And so like in some ways, by not being able within a Eurocentric sort of position, by not being able to bear witness to oneself's position and creating other, that it's not able to actually see this aspect of constant destruction that modernity sort of does, and or that it must in order to be. And so then I kind of like think about like geography is equated to time, and like thinking about actually Adon's work. I've never read it, and I have my book coming in the mail soon. Thank you, Dena. And it really actually made me think a little bit about, it was this poet Solmas Sharif I grew up with when I was a kid, and she wrote this book, Look, and it's also very visual and interrogates the Department of Justice and the terminology, and something in there that I think she said, I don't remember for exactly, but I was really thinking when I was reading Adnan's text and talking about the sun, is this idea of how long does it take time to reach, and thinking within these ideas of modernity, like what, geography being equated to time, and how long does it time to reach, or for the sun to reach, and also like in this idea of an image to reach. So this like thing of burning, and that really kind of makes me think about like the sun is this very disruptive force. And I think I was making these connections, and I hope I'm not like losing everything, but like making these connections into these other ideas and issues and translation of what modernity is. And then of course that brings me to sort of like ideas of like, I guess I'm wondering, any thoughts on that, or what? And then also think about COVID-19. Well, yes, like I think like a lot of people, I've heard people asking like, oh, are you having like weird dreams, or artists doing projects about dreams that are so weird now that it's COVID-19? And I'm just like, my dreams are the most mundane pieces of shit dreams that I've like ever had in my life. Like I dream about like grading a student, and I dream about like having a critique, and it's so boring, and I'm just like, no. But I really wonder though, like how, this sort of like approach about like COVID-19, right, with like war terminology and all of this, and really COVID-19 is, I don't know, I wonder within the sense, is it a uniquely modern issue? And so therefore it must be defined as war, or it's only able to be looked at through that perception and, through this sort of like invisible enemy, or it has to be called apocalyptic. And I don't know if like by challenging that, am I like reducing other ideas or possibilities or something? And so then, but yeah, so I'm not sure if that's like this like issue. I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm really wondering like if we think about these issues as an issue with like memory and like an issue of imagination, then with modernity constantly destroying itself, then memory in some way is kind of constantly destroyed. So then what are the challenges? How are the ways that we can shift perception if one isn't necessarily imagining a future, but one is imagining like a memory or imagining that? But I think there's like two aspects to that maybe. So I wonder if it's really more of an issue of perception and not necessarily an issue of sort of the language or the image and this idea that we're holding it. And I'm just, curious.
Sahar? Sahar, did you have something to say?
Christian.
I'm not going to respond to this because my response would be to a previous comment. So if there's any response, I'm happy to get that forward, and then I respond to what I would like to.
Okay, I think the idea that Shola brought up was really interesting because I think my own problem with modernity and how, when it comes to artistic expression, at least, which is probably what we're talking about, what Shola was talking about, or perception, I feel that at least in my career, there is this idea that we, the non sort of Euro-Christian world, cannot necessarily talk about ourselves as well as they can talk about even us, not only themselves. So there's this sense that we don't have the tools and the agency to analyze our own reality, either through artistic expression or analytical expression or like intellectual work. I don't know if any of you ever had that, has had that feeling in your work, but there's this sense that like I have a friend who lives in Germany, and she's working on like Iran's mediatic sort of image, in the Western media. And she said that when she wanted to talk to somebody to sort of look at what she's done so far, like her mentor introduced all these German people who had done work on Iran, but she kept trying to tell him that no, there are all these Iranian scholars that she can go to, but he continuously thought that these Germans who were not Iranians, had never lived Iranian, had a better perception, had a better understanding of what was going on in Iran, which of course just got her so angry. And so I constantly in my work or reading other people's work, and I don't even think it's so much as Eastern thing. I think there are so many underdog countries, you know, who don't think, like when the West comes with its intellectual eye to look at their work, it's as if we come short, we fall short in putting into the right words or the right image or the right music or the right film what we're all about, what we have experienced, what we have lived. And so I guess in that point, they think it's as if we're not modern enough yet to speak of what we have gone through or what we think of the world or how we see the future. I don't know. Is that something anybody else shares? I don't know, just putting it out there.
I think it's about validation. We still seem to need validation from from that white.
Well, they want to constantly give us validation. It's not like we need it. It's just like
no, we don't need
telling
it.
us
We don't need
they need to validate us.
Yes, this is what we've been taught. We've been taught that we constantly need validation.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose we're really saying exactly what our previous sort of great women have been talking about, you know, through the civil rights movement in America as well. Mm-hmm. Women like Audre Lorde.
Could I address Amina's comment as well as Sahar's for a second? Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually some of the damage that's done by these particular attitudes is it's most pernicious in its most subtle ways. All right. I think that often enough, it's not necessarily explicitly stated as some sort of a racial or cultural imbalance. And that's the most frightening part of it. To give you sort of like an explicit example of this, so I was friends with the last CMAP fellow for South Asia at MoMA, Pranya Desai. She's friends with a few of us here. She brought this. She came to talk to my class, and she brought up this really, really interesting sort of point that I hadn't really thought about before. Pranya Desai, she was, I think, maybe 42, 43 at the time when she was a CMAP fellow. The fellowship is intended for pre-docs, post-docs. You're supposed to be maybe around 25, 26, 27 years old. You're a junior scholar who then moves on to like some sort of a senior state thanks to this sort of junior fellowship. However, because jobs in the arts are so damned hard to find around the world, that a lot of senior scholars who are essentially constitute a brain trust in their own respective countries come to the MoMA, they come to the Met, they come to these monumental edifices, they contribute their genius, but then they don't even get a credit line in the catalog because they are a junior fellow. So because particularly New York and London and Paris, they have this cachet as well as the money, they put their money where their mouth is concerning the arts, they actually have the capacity to sort of bring the larger sort of international world under the New York purview. And I think that is also equally dangerous, if not more dangerous.
Rashmi, totally, I want to echo this. I just want to say that this is it. There are certain gatekeepers, and there are in academia, in the arts and culture, and these gatekeepers, to kind of bring us back to materiality of things, is that those privilege Western eye and Western view. So yeah, totally.
Christian.
I'm just a little bit going to wind back the conversation when we talked about like orientalization and self-orientalization, but I think it's kind of going to connect to what we talked about now. I shared a few links to different scholars that I think are quite valuable to rethink a different way to write about art history in a non-national way necessarily. my research mainly works with education and socially engaged practices. So I've been kind of struggling with, for example, that in Eastern Europe, every kind of socially engaged art is drawn back to participatory performances. And it's quite interesting in the story of Orientalization and how we try to create our own heroes. That how, for example, the 90s kind of started here in art historical scholarship and artistic practices, because exactly the lack of institutions that Bojana pointed out is that certain art historians tried to create this kind of national kind of schools of contemporary art that eventually would have these kind of narratives of the big names who are kind of singularly existing within their own country, which was kind of really damaging because it would eventually just reassure the Western eye over Eastern Europe that Eastern Europe is kind of separated from the discussion of what is Europe, and how everything was formulated here during communism is completely separated, although it was extremely, untrue, because there was a flux of people, there was circulation of knowledge. And I think that kind of also brings the question, like, to what extent you can use Orientalization to your own good, because of course you would like and you would need to access these sort of material gatekeepers, but just only to the point that you are not cheating on yourself and kind of cheating up the reality of the story. Because then you would, for example, the recent dissertation I finished was on educational practices in Romania, and the biggest scholar in Romania on performance art, her name is Ilia Pintilea, and she wrote a book called Actionism in Romania. And she's one of those scholars who's kind of obsessed with the testimony between alternative art scene and official art scene, which is extremely harmful because it puts up this agonistic approach that anything that is state supported is sort of evil, and anything that was out of state support is experimental, which just simplifies down the whole conversation, doesn't leave any possibility for gray space. I mean, like, I even know from, for example, from Yugoslavia, if you think of Sanja Ivekovic, nobody really talked about her work in the perspective that she's actually the daughter of a state official, or the same with Marina Abramovic. Nobody really understood this kind of nuances within the conversation. So I think, I don't know, this was mainly just like a personal comment on the whole thing, but I think Orientalization can only go as far as we don't try to cage ourselves into these kind of distinctions, because, for example, Eastern Europe just is not separated from Europe as other things, and other parts of the world are not separated from art as a kind of international or even global, I don't even know what's the term to use here right now, conversation, because there is no, there's a constant flow of information that comes from one place to another. And if you have any other methodologies that you have in your own region or your own study, I would be really interested if you could share it under the ones that I shared.
Thank you, Christian.
You got two hands.
Ava.
Well,
no,
Alia,
who is first?
Alia first, yeah.
It's actually Mariam here.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, it's my sister's account, but I suppose I'm gonna jump back into another spot, assuming the non-linear structure that we all love so much. But actually is really referential to what a lot of people have been mentioning about the, how to handle the influx and the flux of information. And Rashmi was, reflecting on her time as an undergrad, and I've recently come out of that and have been processing my experience within the institution and within colonial curriculum and this is also actually what is caused my response right now. Was my mum jumped in first, but it was after what Sahar had said about the German the German artists that had, you know, wanted to show that one's own, you know, country's work. But so within the colonial curriculum, there's a kind of, it creates a kind of schizophrenia, what Du Bois calls double consciousness, in which you relate to yourself and your traditions and your history as other. So you don't know the history of South Asia or West Africa. You learn it from the European point of view. You're being taught yourself as other. And that has profound psychological, spiritual, and political ramifications. But, you know, given the ubiquity and hegemony of the Western world, you have to understand it. And yeah, so that was just what I wanted to say in response to that. And if it's possible, I'm not usually very fond of taking much time and space speaking, but me and my sister are in Amman, Jordan, and I brought one book with me, and there's a particular passage from it that really resonated, where Toni Morrison, I have had trouble finding my own words and have been looking towards a lot, you know, people who have dealt with crisis in their multiple ways. So I'll just, it discusses themes of, you know, time and modernity, and yeah, those words come up.
Which book did you choose for Toni Morrison?
It's The Source of Self-Regard. So yeah, just essays. But yeah, it's, you know, quite in the middle of it, but I'll just say this as my piece. So it's from the essay The War on Error. And so, yeah, so, okay. She talks about the inability or unwillingness to imagine future's future, the inability or unwillingness to contemplate a future that is neither afterlife nor the tenure of grandchildren. Time itself seems not to have a future that equals the length or breadth or sweep or even the fascination of its past. Infinity is now apparently the domain of the past, and the future becomes discoverable space, outer space, which is in fact the discovery of past time, billions of years of it. Random outbreaks of Armageddonism and persistent apocalyptic yearnings suggest that the future is already over. Oddly enough, it is in the West where advanced progress and change have been signatory features, where confidence in an enduring future is at its slightest. Since 1945, World Without End has been subject to serious debate. Even our definitions of the present have prefixes pointing backward: postmodern, post-structuralist, post-colonial, post-Cold War. Our contemporary prophets look back behind themselves after what has gone on before. There are good reasons for this rush into the past for all our answers to contemporary problems. First, there is the happiness that is exploration, its revision, its deconstruction afford. One reason has to do with the secularization of culture, another to do with the theocratization of culture. In the former, there will be no Messiah and the afterlife is understood to be medically absurd. In the latter, the only existence that matters is the one following death. In both, sustaining human existence on this planet for another 500 million years is beyond our powers of imagination. We are cautioned against the luxury of such meditation, partly because it is the unknown, mostly because it may defer and displace contemporary issues, like missionaries who were accused of diverting their converts' attention from poverty during life to rewards following death. I don't want to give the impression that all current discourse is unrelievedly oriented to the past and indifferent to the future. The social and natural sciences are full of promises and warnings that will affect us over very long stretches of time. Scientific applications are poised to raise hunger, annihilate pain, extend individual lifespans by producing illness-resistant people and disease-resistant plants. Communication technology is making sure that virtually everyone on Earth can interact with one another and be entertained, maybe even educated while doing so. We are warned about global change in terrain and weather that radically alters human environment. We are warned of the consequences of maldistributed resources on human survival and warned of the impact of over-distributed humans on natural resources. We invest in the promises and sometimes act intelligently on the warnings, but the promises trouble us with ethical dilemmas and a horror of playing God blindly, while the warnings have left us less and less sure of how and which and why. The prophecies that win our attention are those with bank accounts large enough or photo ops sensational enough to force debate and outline corrective action, so we can decide which war or political debacle or environmental crisis is intolerable enough, which disease, which disaster, which institution, which plant, which animal, bird, or fish needs our attention most. These are obviously serious concerns. What is noteworthy among the promises and warnings is that, other than products, a little bit more personal time owing to improved health and more resources in the form of leisure and money to consume these products and services, the future has nothing to recommend itself. We are being seduced into accepting truncated short-term CEO versions of the world's holy human race. The loudest voices are urging those already living in day-to-day dread to think of the future in military terms as a cause for an expression of war. We are being bullied into understanding the human project as a manliness contest where women and children are the most dispensable collateral. If scientific language is no longer individual life in exchange for an ethical one, if political agenda is the xenophobic protection of a few of our families against the catastrophic others, if religious language is discredited as contempt for the non-religious, if secular language bridles in fear of the sacred, if market language is merely an excuse for inciting greed, if the future of knowledge is not wisdom, but upgrade, where might we look for humanity's own future? Isn't it reasonable to assume that projecting earthly human life into the far distant future may not be the disaster movie we have come to love, but a reconfiguration of what we are here for, to lessen suffering, to tell the truth, raise the bar, to stand one remove from timeliness, like an artist encouraging reflection, stoking imagination, mindful of the long haul and putting his or her own life on the line to imagine work in a world worthy of life, for a future that perhaps only the young will be able fully, purely to imagine. This new war against error has no guarantee of victory. Sentient life is original and very hard. A student of mine recently gave me a piece of art, printed, cut, and pasted. Within it were these lines. No one told me it was like this. It's only matter, shot through with pure imagination. So rise up, little souls, join and join the doomed army toward the meaning of change. Fight, fight, wage the unwinnable. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
I'm sorry that was so long, but it felt very relevant.
It is.
Can you please share the title of the essay?
Yeah, definitely. And I can send photos of the pages if anyone wants to read.
Dishes.
Rava, do you want to take the mic?
This is pretty much close to the closing of our session, so I thought maybe we could close with a somatic meditation with closed eyes for like 5 minutes.
Sure.
Okay. All right, everyone. Please just let go of anything that is like hard on your body. Close your eyes. Inhale deep and slow. In 6 counts, take it all in. Be completely present to your breath, your life force. Take it all in. How's your spine doing? What is the condition of your spine? Bring it up. Inhale deep and slow again. Fill up your lungs all the way. Experience the void for a teeny second, and then let it go. All out. Empty out, release all the things you didn't say you wanted to say, or something that has even not have come to you yet. Release it all. Second time. Spine straight, shoulders down. Inhale deep and slow. 6 counts. Feel your lungs expanding. Get to the void. Prepare your sigh. Get it all out. Go with it. Void out. Bringing your attention back to your spine as you breathe normally, deep, strong, slow. Imagine your spine as that connecting device that connects you to the forgotten networks. See your spine, how many bones it has. How does it feel? How many parts of it has been injured? What traumas it carries? Tell your spine, I got you. In any ways you feel, suits you. Next inhale, bring your breath into your eyes. It can be closed or open. Just let them sink back in. A hair. Let your eyes fall back in. You might feel your eyes going back in for left and right because of how much screen you look at. The muscles might automatically move. Just let them be. Breathe into your eyes and fold them, drop them back in. One more breathe with your eyes. Think about all the things that you saw past, present, what you might see in the future. Let it all go out. Release it in your breath, coming out. Bring your attention to your tongue. What is the condition of your tongue? Maybe roll it once in your mouth. How many holes and bumps you have in your mouth? Can you memorize them? Roll it. Inhale deep and slow. Swallow once. Feel your water inside. Bring your life force, your air. Mix it with your water. Get to your throat, the place of your truth. Whatever is unsaid, again, just drop it out in your exhale. Release it out. Bring your attention to your hands. Inhale into your hands. Think about all the things that comes and goes in your hands, how much you give, how much you get. Think about all the institutional traumas you carry. Think about all those fundings, how much you do with what you get, and how terrorizing some of these projects might be in so many scales that are unimaginable. Inhale deep again. Let go of all those institutional traumas. Wash your hands. Washing your hands is a somatic meditation. Next inhale, think about cultivating somatic transnational memories. I'm inhaling Dena more in because of all her incredible work on that. And think about your stomach. Connect to your guts. You can put your hands on your guts, connect to your fire. Inhale deep and slow into your guts. The place that when you feel it, you know it's the truth. where you make your decisions without even knowing. Think about migrational bodies, your bodies, bodies before you, that DNA, that blood, how many migrations have happened. Inhale again, let loose, do whatever your body desires, just let go with it. It's your journey, own your practice. Inhale deep and slow. Think about this migrational revolution after this migrational evolution. Think about immigrant bodies as superheroes. Think about all the capabilities that are in this call and calls that could extend out of this call. Think about who got your back. Think about the power of interdependency. And come out in your own pace and your own grace. Beautiful energy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ava. It was amazing.
It's perfect. I think that's it. We'll let everyone go.
I kind of
Well, thank you, Hekler, for hosting it. Most appreciated. Thank you, Dena.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. This was really beautiful. And Ava, that was an incredible ending to this. Started crying. So anyways, thank you, Hekler. Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you, Ava. Thank you, everyone, for making this really incredible. And I hope this continues within the Heckler space and outside in the different levels we operate. And Ava, please take us there. I need it. Can you be that person for me? I'm passing you the baton. I need you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just a quick announcement. This weekend, we are launching at Poetic Societies based in Detroit, a healing online festival, which is continual. So I would love to continue the conversation in verbal and nonverbal levels, and thinking about how that platform could serve what we all might imagine. And obviously a lot of different programs are happening, so you can just tune in. You can go to poeticsocieties.com homepage, you see all the sessions.
Is it Zoom? You join into, well, we'll look at it, but it's a Poetic Society website, and there's a section where we can
Our
go to.
Vimeo premium broadcasting platform. So we don't use Zoom. Just thinking about the colonialization in terms of the digital platform, and like practicing choosing platforms that are more DIY and independent, or the ones that still we can put a little trust in depending on the scale of what we do, and how we could perhaps think about media in relation to our forgotten histories.
Thank you. And also, we will, Ava, if you want to add the relevant links so we can actually, join, maybe you can add them in the document, or we can also search for it and just add it so everyone have access to it.
Share.
Also, the next Friday will be hosted by Eva Davidova, who is here, with Darko Vukic, who's an artist and curator from Serbia, and Natalia Mount, who is actually based in Oakland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you're all welcome to join again. We'll send the info to everyone on Monday. We're trying to have this like routine of Monday's information day.
I guess I'll just say something about that because you just brought up Natalia's name. I urge you all to come next week, not just because of the Heckler thing. I mean, it is because of the Heckler thing, but Natalia and I are working on a commons project. And I think a lot of folks here would be interested in the project to join or participate, but it's very much in line with the conversations we're having. And maybe I'll talk to Natalia, we're supposed to see each other, and I'll talk to her about maybe pitching the commons. And I mean, she might be doing it anyways, but pitching the commons, because I think that would be a great space to produce work within that space as well and find ways to collaborate Heckler and the commons
the Pro Arts Commons, I should say. So anyways, just wanted to say that because I think it's an amazing project that Natalia is spearheading that I'm participating in.
Eva, do you want to say something about it?
I was just saying that she's going to talk about this. Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Awesome. We're looking forward to it. Thank you all so much for being here. And I want to also give a shout out to Alex. And thank you for leaving the comments in the doc and for waking up at like 5 a.m. to join the conversation. Like, I think that's like you rock.
Yeah.
Superstar.
Thank you all so much. So great to share the space with you, and hope we continue getting to know each other even better and working together. Okay. Take care.
Bye.